Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia. Welcome back to another tier list video as we will take a look at all the unique strategists in the game today. So there is technically 23 of them, but we only have 22 here as one of them is in the 8 Princes and he will be ranked among all the other 8 Princes characters in a future tier list. And in the same format as we have done for our Vanguard and Champion class unique characters, we'll be first taking a look at all their character stats, their background bonuses, their starting item, as well as their unique skills, before coming back here to rank them in our tier list. So let's hop on over, and starting alphabetically, the first character we'll be taking a look at is Chen Gong. So as we can see here, Chen Gong is the Master Magistrate. It's a very simple background. He has 10 points of expertise, 25 points of cunning, and 5 points of instinct, which is actually kind of interesting because he has a lot of combat stats on his background. And his faction-wide bonus here is 2 points of public order, which is actually really bad. And his total skill points or stat points he gets is 40, which is better than the 30, and it's definitely designed this way. He's not super strong. And looking at his starting trait, he has trusting, which is not good if he is in your Prime Minister, heir, or faction leader position, combined with the fact that he only gives +2 public order, pretty much disqualifies him. You can also be very careful in terms of recruiting characters where you are just not going to have enemy spies, so you could safely ignore this for the most part, but he's just not going to be a great Prime Minister, heir, or faction leader regardless. He also has cautious, which gives him some chance to evade capture post-battle, some chance to avoid ambushes, and defiant, which is decent for administrators if you are in a very hostile place where you can cause farther attrition to enemy troops once they run out of supplies, and gives your own army some extra morale when defending. Overall, it's a very combat focused set of skills or traits here, along with his starting stats. You can see that none of these here are actually cunning related, which is actually quite interesting. Even though cautious does provide a bit of cunning, it is classified as a yellow skill or a commander skill in the game, which is quite curious. And then looking at his starter items, most of the strategists in the game, almost all of them, only start out with their unique armor. Now, that's not to say that some won't have some silver swords or bows or maybe a bronze sword at the start, but for the most part, in terms of gold unique items, almost everyone just have their armor. There is one particular character with an extra item, and we'll get to that in the future. So here he has 20 base armor, 18 points of cunning. These are all very standard. 30% range block chance, quite useless on higher difficulties, and 15% speed. And this is more of a reflection of which chapter pack he was released. So in this case, he was a World Betrayed, and most of the characters that got added in a World Betrayed have 15% speed on their armor. So it's really just a reflection of which group of developer worked on the character. Some has 15, some of the base game one has 12%. So it's just a slight difference here. And then moving on to his unique skills. Here's where he gets a little bit more interesting. So to clear things up, the default skills from left to right on the skill tree for active skills for generic strategists should be Wisdom of the River, and the second skill should be Stifling Deluge, and the third skill should be Inspiring Surge. You'll see all three of these skills shown throughout this video, so if you don't see them all right here, that's fine. And why we want to tell you the order of these is because I listed all these skills in the order from left to right. So you see here where he should have Wisdom River if he was a generic strategist, he has Analyze Weakness. But in the third slot where he should have Inspiring Surge, he instead have Wisdom River. So he retained this generic skill just in a different place on his skill tree, and his unique skill technically is Analyze Weakness, which is a passive debuff, very similar to Wisdom River in terms of what it does. It's a 20% melee evasion, 20% armor debuff. It's effective all the time because it's passive, and it has 50-meter range. Wisdom of the River is very similar, as you can see. It's also a 50-meter range. It's 30-second duration, so it's a timed active debuff, and it's 100% hit to melee evasion and armor. So it's a lot stronger, but it only works for 30 seconds before it goes to a 120-second cooldown, which is quite long. Whereas Analyze Weakness is always there as long as you're close to that enemy general that you want to debuff. So here the situation is he's a great debuffer in terms of setting up some other generals to duel, which is really his only effective skill in combat. So you always can apply a 20% hit to their melee evasion and armor. Now, it might seem like 20% is quite low, but trust me, it's actually very good because it looks like it's a 5-time difference in terms of capability compared to Wisdom River. Most generals don't have that much armor or melee evasion. It's not a multiplication here where you take their total armor, let's say it's 50, and you multiply it by 0.8 to get to the debuff amount. The 20% is subtracted from their armor. So armor's often seen as a percentage in the game. So if you see 55, that's 55%. If you lose 20% of that, you're down to 35%. That's the same thing with melee evasion. So if they don't have a lot to start with, you're doing a lot of damage to their stats with Analyze Weakness. Whereas Wisdom River oftentimes is just an overkill. Because let's say they only have 30% melee evasion or 30% armor, they can't really go negative in that stat. They just drop to 0. Whereas Analyze Weakness will put them at, let's say, 10%, 10%. So it's still very strong, even though it feels like a giant gap between Analyze Weakness and Wisdom River. And on top of that, he retained it, even though it's in a slot where originally Wisdom River should be for generic strategists. So not too bad here. And then moving on, we have the Deadly Beauty, Diaochan, who has a very simple background bonus. 35 points of cunning straight, nothing else, and 5% upkeep cost for new spies faction-wide. No conditions here. So as long as you have her in your faction, all of your upkeep cost for new spies is 5% less. It's not a game-changing bonus, but it does help in that you don't actually have to put her into any positions to receive this bonus. This is very weird. You don't see this type of bonus very often. But Diaochan is also very hard to get into your faction. She only spawns in certain factions or start in certain start dates. But as I mentioned before in many of our tier list videos, we're going to rank them assuming we have all of them on hand. And we're not really going to consider things like availability, obtainability, or age, because they get super complicated depending on like which start you're playing, whether you're playing timeless or not. So we're going to ignore all that. We're just going to compare their potential. Let's say you have everyone. Who would you use first? That's kind of the tier list we're going for. Now for Diaochan's starting trait, she is charismatic, perceptive, and beautiful. So charismatic and beautiful are kind of counteracting each other here a little bit. One gives faction-wide satisfaction, one gives dissatisfaction faction-wide, but also personal satisfaction in the case of beautiful. And public order for administrative commanderies for charismatic. Not so important here. The skill that we want to highlight here for the strategist going forward is actually perceptive. This is one of my favorite skills to see in the game because it provides a 10% chance of capturing enemy generals post-battle. It is particularly valuable on characters who can get the patience skill, which is available on strategist trees. So combining that 25% from patience and the 10% here from perceptive, and potentially adding a shaman, which is another 10%, you can get the most boost you can have in terms of capturing enemy officers post-battle. It does require that general to be leading the army, since this is a personal bonus. You don't see anything like own army or this army as a conditional statement here. So basically this only applies when you're commanding, but overall perceptive is something that we will actually value quite a bit in the game, because I'm sure a lot of players want to collect more generals, and this is definitely one way to help you in that effort. Now, in terms of her armor, we have 20 base, 18 cunning, very similar. She was also introduced in World Betrayed, which is why we see the 15% speed. 15% range block chance, nothing too fancy here. 25% melee evasion is actually quite curious. This is a huge bonus, mainly because it's equivalent to maybe like 50 points of expertise, and it's really strong. But for a strategist, it's not that useful. Very rarely would you put this strategy in harm's way. You could, because if we flip over and take a look at her unique skill, she has a very default tree. You see the first skill or the leftmost skill replaces Wisdom River, and the other two are the default ones, which we didn't talk about last time, but we can take a look at them. They kind of work in pairs. Stifling Deluge, make sure the enemy keep increasing their cooldown on their ability by 5 seconds, preventing them from using their ability as long as your general is within 15 meters of them. So kind of shutting down enemy ability usage. And Inspiring Surge targets your own generals, also in a 50-meter radius, which you continuously decrease their cooldown by 2 seconds. So you essentially every 1 second you speed it up by 2 seconds, so every second counts as 3 seconds in a sense. So things like 120-second cooldowns will become just 40-second cooldowns. That's kind of how you can understand it. Whereas the +5 every second with a 4-second cooldown means every 5 seconds the cooldown increases by 5 seconds, means they never get to use their ability. So that's kind of how these two work. Their okay skills require you to be up close and personal with the enemy, which is something you might not want your strategist to do. But in Diaochan's case, maybe the extra melee evasion is going to help her out. But what we want to talk about here is actually her unique skill here, the Heavenly Grace. So this active ability is an active debuff. It works when you're not on elephant, so that's pretty standard. And you have a very limited range, 35 meters. It's not huge, and it only lasts 15 seconds. And the effect is actually super similar to Wisdom of the River, except for it doesn't just target generals, right? Wisdom River is only applied, well, actually no, Wisdom River is applied to both generals and troops, but it doesn't have the immobilized skill here. And the immobilized skill is actually kind of underrated. So if you think about it, if you can force the enemy to stand within your range units that they're hitting them for 15 seconds and you strip away all their melee evasion, all their armor, then you're going to have a great time to do damage, maybe 2-3 volleys worth, and they still have to continue after that. So it buys you a lot of time. The range is the thing. How do you get the enemies clumped together? Maybe you have to throw her in there in combat to get them to focus her. That's where maybe her own melee vision comes in handy. Another thing you can use this for, which is actually quite fun, is you can set up one of those oil patches, let the enemy walk on there, immobilize them, then light up the oil patch, and they can't run away, dealing massive damage to the enemy units. So all this strategy requires you to herd the enemy together, and that's something kind of required here. And you only get one shot to use this, and it's not that bad because you're not going to miss this ability. There's no target. You just have to place Diaochan in the right place, click it, activates instantly, enemy can't move, enemy becomes super weak in terms of melee and armor. So I think this is a strong ability. Now obviously, would I like this so much more than Wisdom River? Not really, especially this is only one use. If it wasn't one use, then of course it would be great. Plus the duration on this is also shorter than Wisdom River, which I believe is 30 seconds of debuff in terms of melee evasion armor. So there's a give and take here. Moving on, we have the Vindictive Strategist, one of the newest characters added in from Faith Divided, Fa Zheng, who has 5 points resolve, 15 points of cunning, 10 points of instinct. This largely has to do with the fact that he was a generic character before and he didn't get his background updated. And we have 15% trade influence as a faction-wide bonus. Not so great, but not so bad either. It's unique. You can't really get this from any generic character, but once again, not super good here. And he also has a lot of combat stat on his background bonus here. So that's probably a little hint at one of his ability down the line. Now, in terms of his starting trait, he has Cruel, Perceptive, and Cunning. And the only thing that I really want to talk about here is that he has Perceptive, makes him quite good at capturing enemy generals, something you should definitely value a little bit. And then his armor. Very weird armor value here. 11 points of armor, 9 points of cunning, 15% range damage, and 5% character experience. And here's where you can see a little bit of differences between each chapter pack, where different developers might have a different design take on the character that's being added. But in this case, as a strategist wearing a robe, he has very low armor. He has half the cunning value of a typical cunning only stat boosted unique armor, usually 18. You can see a lot of 18s in this video, and 15% range damage is good. That's a personal boost. That's not given to any retinue or own army. So give him a bow and he'll do wonderful damage for you. Then moving on to his unique skill, we see that Wisdom River and Inspiring Surge are defaults, and his unique one is Mock, which replaces Stifling Deluge, the one that prevents enemy from using abilities. But this is definitely a great replacement. So Mock is an active debuff, which means you can't really miss with this. You target enemy general. It's not very far range. It doesn't say on the ability, but I believe it's something close to 50 meters, same as your Encourage rank or range. It's not super far. You just have to walk up to the enemy, but you can't miss with this. It's not throwing a dagger or anything. And you also do not have a limit on this. So what this does is you can target enemy generals. You can only target enemy generals. And once you hit them with this, they lose 10 points of morale, 20% of melee attack rate, so they become slower, and they lose 60k of damage over 60 seconds. And that's the duration of this debuff. So they lose 20% melee attack rate for 60 seconds, which is pretty huge, especially if you can apply this to someone who is dueling, or right before they duel actually. But honestly, with this continuous damage, you can just kill people with Mach. It will take a lot of time, so requires a bit of patience because 120-second cooldown is quite a bit. If you have another strategist with you with Inspiring Surge, you could reduce that down to 40 seconds as we mentioned, but even then, the 60-second duration will have to tick before it goes to cooldown. So it's really a 180-second cycle, which is quite long. You would need to do about 4 hits of Mach on large unit size, which these figures are from, to kill a standard general. 2 hits if you're fighting another strategist, which usually have about 10 to 11k of health. So it's powerful, you can't miss, and you can use this as many times as you want. So if you kite away, you could technically kill all the enemy generals with Fa Zheng without an issue in any battle. So that makes him very powerful, but it does take a lot of time and patience when playing out battles that way. So that's something you have to consider. And also the fact that you have to get him close to the enemy and then get him out and repeat that process. So that's something to consider as well. But overall, very interesting idea being added in here. And it's definitely a very powerful and unique skill. Then we have the Astute Advisor, Guo Jia, who gets 20 points of expertise, 20 points of cunning, 20 points of authority, and a very awesome background bonus of minus 10% corruption reduction, basically faction-wide if he's Prime Minister, heir, or faction leader. And if you play the game, you know that corruption is your enemy around the mid to late game as you expand, and you definitely need to find ways to get your faction-wide corruption reduction close to 100% in order to have a healthy economy. And Guo Jia is one of those really awesome characters who can get this done. And because of this skill, he is quite powerful. Just this single faction-wide bonus is enough to automatically include him into your Prime Minister role whenever you have that unlocked. Then in terms of starting trait, we have Burrent, which is my personal favorite trait you can have. You get 15% extra ammo for your own units within this county and 30% less ammo for the enemy units in this county. So the requirement is not that you have to show up on the battlefield. You just have to be standing in the county. So if you're on the field with a bunch of Burrent officers, the enemy will not have any ammo and you will have a ton of ammo. And on top of that, it's pretty good for administrators, 10% to all sources. He also has Perceptive, which makes him an excellent general to capture enemy officers with. And he has Cunning, which gives a bunch of cunning stat, as the name suggests. So very powerful list of traits, all blue traits here. So a bunch of cunning being added as well, making Guo Jia very, very nice in terms of being a strategist. Then in terms of his armor, we have 15 points of armor base, 18 cunning, 10% character experience for this army, which means every general within his army, up to the 2 other generals, will get 10% character experience, including himself. So you will level up quite nicely. Then you get 15% speed, which is just always a helpful addition. Then moving on to his unique skill, he has one that replaces Inspiring Surge, and that's Foresight. This looks weak at first, but what this really does is it will break enemy stock abilities. So they cannot be invisible when Guo Jia is present. It's infinite range, infinite duration. It's also a passive skill, which makes this probably the most powerful forest spotting type of skill in the game because you don't need to do anything. Just be on the field. You have unlimited vision, unlimited forest spotting. They cannot hide away from you, which enable you to light forests on fire as they move through it to target enemy generals or enemy units as they burn down. And if enemy have something that's say stock, you can identify them and be able to hunt them down so they cannot sneak up on you. Very, very strong. Then moving on, we have the Blade in the Dark, Jia Xu. So Jia Xu here has 5 points of expertise, 20 points of cunning, 10 points of instinct. Nothing too fancy here, 35 points, like 5 points more than default 30 for someone with a unique background. His background will unlock a unique assignment, or not a unique assignment, but unique for him, I guess. Counter espionage adds a little bit of cost for enemy spies, not really worth it. And his ability also adds a little bit of cost for enemy spies. So he's sort of the counter spy character. Usually my method of counter spying is just be careful when I recruit people. So this doesn't really appeal to me. But if you are not as careful, maybe you could use this, but I still recommend against it. It's not a very valuable background to go for. Then in terms of his traits, he has cunning, deceitful, and perceptive. Not a bad list, all blue, no brand here, but perceptive is activated here. He got deceitful, which is another spy related background or trait here with the bonus. And then in terms of his armor, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. 15 base armor value, nothing there, 18 cunning, 15 speed, but this is the one. Enable snipe on own retinue. So he can give his own retinue snipe, which is the ability to remain invisible while shooting. So usually you see this combined with stock. If you have stock and snipe, you can fire from anywhere on the field and remain visible while you fire. Very, very powerful. But let's say you don't have that combination because most units don't come with stock. Then what you can do here is just place your unit in the forest where they are hidden, and they can fire from the forest without the enemy knowing they're there. So think about an ambush battle where his retinues will be invisible while firing from those forests, and the enemy will just walk. They don't even feel they're getting shot. They will just keep walking straight because they don't see where the firing is coming from. So it's a very powerful little ability here, and it's very rare. You don't see this at all in game. There's almost nothing that gives this ability to your own retinue, so definitely very valuable. Then moving on in terms of his skills, he replaces Inspiring Surge with Hidden Strike, which is a melee attack. So basically it's kind of your next attack, or basically it's attack that you use around you. There's a 30-second duration when you hit enemy with this. The debuff decreases their speed, decreases their armor, and deals 3.8k damage over 5 seconds. You can compare this sort of as the champion ability of not Binding Fury, but kind of in between Binding Fury and Hamstring. Does about halfway there. The damage is equivalent to Flame the Phoenix damage, but it's over time, and it's also just kind of a targeted strike. It's quite nice, I mean, but it's just weird to have this on Strategist, which means you have to kind of get him into the enemy to do damage, because Strategists tend to have low health. They tend to have about half the health as a regular character. Every other class have around 20k health on large unit size, whereas Strategists have about 10k health. So getting them in there could prove very dangerous, but this is definitely a nice skill to have, very different from most other strategists. Then moving on, we have the Master Scholar, Rong. So 30 points of expertise, 20 points of cunning, a little bit of authority because he's a faction leader, which is why he has so many faction-wide bonuses. 5k population growth, super underrated, but super good, because you get this at the start of playing his faction, obviously, and this is per county growth. So if you have a 3-county commandery, that's 20k population growth per turn. That's pretty strong. You stack your population up from the beginning, you get a lot of income bonuses, you get a lot of replenishment bonuses, you speed up your settlement upgrade, so a lot of things working in your favor here. And then 15% recruitment cost discount for crossbow units. Obviously for his own faction, this is super good, given that his unique units are both crossbow units. But even if you get him when you're not playing his faction, this can be useful too. Crossbows are pretty powerful. Late game Imperial crossbow units are very strong. Getting a recruitment discount for them definitely helps. And 50% trade influence also definitely helps here as well. So these are nice bonuses on his background. And then moving on to his traits. Kind, scholarly, understanding. Nothing really fancy here. Nothing really to talk about. And then in terms of his armor, 20 points, 15 and 6 split between cunning and authority. Kind of fit him as a faction leader in the game. 30% range block chance, nothing really going on there. Enables encourage, so kind of a commander flair where you can boost the morale of nearby units. Then he doesn't have any unique skills, so there's nothing to see, and we're moving on to the next character, which is the Elegant Survivor, Lady Zhen. Now Lady Zhen here has 25 points of cunning, 10 points of authority, and 5 points of satisfaction faction-wide if she is made into Prime Minister, heir, or faction leader. And satisfaction is really her game here, because she is the Elegant Survivor, so she has to switch a lot of factions just like she did in history. And we see this from her traits. So in Kind, we have 5 points. In Dutiful, we have 10 points, and also 50% desire for higher office, or 50% less desire, I should say. And also Scholarly on top of that. Nothing too fancy here. And then moving on to her armor is where we really see a lot of satisfaction. 15 armor base, 18 cunning, but most importantly, 20 points to her own satisfaction. So it's quite easy to keep her satisfied in your faction, and it gives her encourage as well. She also have no unique skills, so she basically uses Wisdom River, Stifling Deluge, and Inspiring Surge. And moving on, we have the Vicious Shadow, Li Ru. So he gets 30 points expertise, 20 points of cunning, 10 points authority. He also has the counter espionage unlock and also has a spy related passive. This is 5 points less. It's about half value of what you get on Jia Xu. So they're very similar, but he's a little bit weaker in that regard. And then looking at his trait, perceptive, very useful, artful, another one of those spy traits. And then you have cowardly, which is not so great. As it does reduce quite a bit of morale for himself, which is something you have to take care of when he's in combat. And he's actually going to be in combat quite a lot because he's designed with double health. So there are 4 strategists in the game that have double health. There was 1 from the base game and 3 that came alongside the Furious Wild. So whoever developed the Furious Wild made all their strategists double health. I don't know if this is intentional or a mistake. But we have them in the game like this. So Li Ru's one of them. He gets 10% melee evasion on top of that too. So this is definitely super strong. Now, double health here has a star around it because it does not come with the armor. It just comes with the character. But I decided, it's a combat related one, so we're going to put it with the armor. You're going to see this for 3 more characters coming down the line. And in terms of his unique skills, he has Unyielding Earth, Hold Firm, and Wisdom River, which is all super interesting because this set of skills makes him kind of weird, where it's kind of a shame he's a strategist because he cannot duel or else he'd be really good. Because remember, his armor already provided 10% melee evasion, and then Hold Firm here is a 5-phase skill, similar to Tenacity of Steel, where you kind of progressively get stronger every 15 seconds. Once you reach phase 5, which will take you about a minute of sustained combat, you get 100% melee evasion. So you pretty much have the minimum value. There's always a minimum hit chance. I think it's about 4% in the game, if I'm not mistaken. But you basically become close to unhittable, as close as you can be to be unhittable. And to get you through that first, 4 phases, you have Unyielding Earth, which is good for 2 of those phases. So once you get into combat, you activate Unyielding Earth, you get 100% melee evasion. It cuts off, and then your Hold Firm is probably ready in stage 3, which is 50%, I believe. And then, you're last another 15 seconds, then you're closer to stage 4, another 15 seconds, you're 100%. You're just good going forward. And you also can debuff the enemy. You retained Wisdom River. So of all the generic skills, you retain the strongest one on top of that. But unfortunately, he is a strategist. He's not a sentinel. He cannot duel, but he can stay in melee. So you can have him fight units, maybe on foot even, where he's just stuck in the enemy melee pile, not charging in and out of combat with the horse. And he can get to 100% melee evasion, quite strong, also debuff. He can kind of lead the front line here. So a very interesting character. And moving on, we have the opportunistic ruler, Liu Yan, who has 10 points of cunning, 5 points instinct, 15 points authority, 15% income from peasantry. This is okay. It's not good. Same as the chancellor bonus, but it's okay. If you don't have anyone else, this is not a bad bonus in the late game because you could have quite a bit of peasantry depending on where you start out in the game, and it could be worth quite a bit of money for you. But obviously you're hoping for more from a leader, but unfortunately he's retaining the same bonuses he had when he was a generic character. Then in terms of his traits, we have ambitious, superstitious, and deceitful. Not the greatest list of traits, but pretty accurate historically, so I'm okay with them. And then in terms of his armor, also since he came from Fates Divided, the figures are a little weird. They don't use the standard, 15, 10, 20. It's 14 here and 16 points of cunning. Also 50% ammo on himself plus 25% range damage on himself. So get this man a bow and he can do a lot of damage. Because 50% ammo means whatever the bow's maximum damage is, he has 50% extra damage because he has 50% extra ammo compared to other people using the bow. And then on top of that, his base range damage is also going to get increased by 25% just on himself. It's not applied to any retinue. So whenever you get a bow, give it to him, the best bow you have, and he's going to dish out a ton of damage. So that's something you should actually look for when you are playing with Liu Yan here in the game. Then moving on in terms of his unique skill here, we have Rally the Troops, which is an active buff. It gives 10 points of morale to your nearby units, 50 range, 30 seconds, and it gives their attack rate increased by 10%, whether it's range or melee. It's not the worst bonus in the game. 10 points of morale is actually worth quite a bit, and he still kept Wisdom River. You basically lost Inspiring Surge, which is not that useful. So it's an improvement for sure. And the cooldown is not that long, 60 seconds, so I think this is a pretty decent boost. Then moving on to another faction leader, we have the respected mentor Lu Zhi, who has 30 points of expertise, 20 points of cunning, 10 points of resolve. And in terms of faction-wide bonuses, 10% character experience, plus 2 starting rank for all recruits, and 6 points of morale. They're okay. All of them are useful, but none of them are game-breakingly strong. So I would say it's pretty average, but compared to others with only one thing listed, like 2 public orders from Chen Gong, this is godlike, but it's not that good. And then in terms of his traits, we have Scholarly, Trusting, Sincere, none of which are very impressive. Then in terms of armor, it's probably the most basic armor in the game. Mandate of Heaven armors are not known to be very fancy. 20 points of armor base and 15 cunning. That's it. Nothing else. We're just wearing silk here. And in terms of his unique skills, he has Turning the Tide, replacing Wisdom River, which is the strongest one, so you're losing out quite a bit there. But what this does is that as long as there is an enemy unit routing within your 100 range, so you have to be close, but not super close, 100 range is pretty far. As long as there's an enemy unit routing within your range, anyone within your range, so you have to still be within 100, so you're basically in the thick of the fighting, your men, their men. As long as one enemy unit route, your units around you will get 25% boosted damage. Range, melee, base, armor piercing, just a nice 25% boost. That's pretty strong. And then a 10 point of morale added on as well. So as long as you're winning, or as long as you're able to identify the weakest target on the enemy side, on their front line, and you're able to make that unit route, all your units will become stronger. So I think Turning the Tide is actually a pretty strong passive buff because it lasts forever as long as that enemy unit is still routing. And with the way routing works nowadays, if you can route one unit, you can chain route a bunch of units, and you can definitely turn the tide. So it's a very fitting title here. And then moving on, we have the Fledgling Phoenix, Pang Tong. 20 points of expertise, 30 points of cunning, 10 points of authority. Has an interesting increased provision, kind of a replenishment boost, mustering boost type of assignment there. And then 15% range damage. Now, I believe this is only base damage. It's not armor piercing, but still a nice boost. If you have nothing else interesting going on, that's not a bad faction-wide bonus to give. And in terms of his traits, kind, enigmatic, humble, nothing too crazy here. And then we also have his starting armor. 15 base, 18 cunning, encourage, and plus 3 morale when the army is attacking. So he has to be commanding general here, I believe. And in terms of his skills, this is where he shines. He has probably one of the most unique skill in the game. So it's called From the Ashes because his title is Fledgling Phoenix. That was kind of his nickname. And he had active buff where you can target if general, but it's a range target. And the range is infinite. So basically, it will automatically target all your generals on the field, except for yourself. And you can only activate this if you have enough health remaining, and the cost of this is 25% of your own health. This is 25% of your maximum health, which on large unit size, which these stats are from, would be around 10k. So it will cost you about 2.5k to use this. You can use this up to 3 times in a fight. I assume you cannot kill yourself with this. So let's say 3 uses only. And what it does is it will grant all your generals for 10 seconds invincibility. Okay, invincibility. Sounds weird, right? It actually is a stat in the game. There are a couple things that can trigger this. Pang Tong is one of them, and Zhang Zhao is another one. But basically, you take no damage. For the next 10 seconds, you cannot take damage. You can still dish out damage, but you just cannot take damage. So that's wonderful. And on top of that, you will heal 8.2k health. So in a typical battle where you only have one army on the field, that's 2 generals getting 8.2k health heal, while you pay about 2.5k health to use. Very good trade. especially since Peng Tong is not going to be on the front. You don't need to put him anywhere. You can put him in the back. It's infinite range. So it's very good. It's very, very powerful. It has a very long cooldown though, but it has no restrictions on usage, which means if you can heal him, which there are ways to heal him. You have Mending skill, which is worth 1.6k. You can use Mending 4 times, which means you can heal up to 6.4k health during a fight. So let's say he has 10k health, he used up 7.5k for 3 heals, you give him 6.4k back, he's at 8.4, then, or 8.9, right, 8.9. Then he can use 3 more times from the ashes. So if you have a combination of a bandit champion with Peng Tong in the army, you can heal your generals in the fight 6 times. So you can heal them twice over and a half in a fight. There's no way your general dies. Like, you win duels in a very different way because the target is automatic, infinite range, all generals. It's kind of strong. But obviously cooldown's a restriction, and using your own health is a restriction because Peng Tong's pretty much not going to be activated. You can't use this next fight because you haven't healed back yet. You have to consider he needs healing too. So those are a few things to consider, but overall, pretty strong combination here. Then moving on, we have Governor Shi for Shi Xie. 20 points of cunning, 20 points of authority, 10% discount for all range units, so all blue units, and then 1 extra trade route. Not bad. Pretty decent bonuses. And then in terms of his traits, we have Scholarly, Brilliant, Wonderful, Clever. And in terms of his armor, here's where things get really interesting because it's not written here, but I'll explain to you guys. 15 points of base, 18 cunning. He has double health, 30% range, 12. Those are boring. He has 2 item sets with the Silver Imperial Sword and I think with the Imperial Bow. And they are Tactician's Design and Celestial Fury. One of which gives 50% extra firing rate, and the other one gives 10% evasion, I believe. Very strong bonuses, I think, for own army as well. It's not just own retinue. You can double check this on the item tier list if you want, but I think I have it right. And it's pretty darn strong. And you start out with those 2 items as default when playing as Shi Xie. Even if you get him from another faction, he usually keeps the item on him because he's the faction leader, so he keeps the item he has. And that's just wonderful. Makes him very, very strong in terms of leading an army or just being part of any army. And then in terms of his skills, he has Turning the Tide, which I already mentioned, kind of strong. And he also has Nature's Ally, which is a passive bonus that gives another 10 points of morale. So in this meta, or it's been changed to this meta probably 3 patches ago, where morale has been debuffed so many times, he has 2 skills that give 10 points of morale, and both of which are passive buffs with infinite duration, as long as you have the conditions, right? For Turning the Tide, you need some sort of routing enemy, but it's 20 points of extra morale for your units, which really is stronger than you think. It's kind of like a health bonus in a sense, where your units might lose more men, but they still wouldn't rout, which is definitely a positive in the game. So these are nice skills. He does lose out on some of the typical powerhouse skills like Wisdom the River, but I think these 2 replacements are not bad. Then moving on, we have the Silver Eminence, Sima Yi. 25 points of expertise, 40 points of cunning, 15 authority, total of 80 points, the highest we've seen so far. He gives military supplies in own territory. For most Han factions, this is completely useless. For bandit factions, this is really good for sharing the loot or sharing the spoils, because military supplies becomes loot. And you just gain passive loot when you're on your own territory, which you can just share every turn, which I think costs 45. So if you have some other boost or have cunning in that army, you have infinite supplies every turn. Basically, you can keep standing there to share the loot without a worry. And on top of that, he gets 5% replenishment faction-wide, which is definitely good. It's worth about half of a reform that you might rush, in the beginning, costing you about 5 turns or 5 years or 25 turns. So it's worth, 12 turns of game time. I think it's pretty good. And in terms of his starting trait, Brilliant, very, very good trait, elusive, a lot of cunning, ambitious, extra to administrator, another 5%, so 15% to all sources. These are probably as good as you can get in terms of getting all source boosts for administrators. There's another one that gives 5%, but you're really not going to see all three on the same character. It's super rare. And he starts out with 2 trait that gives you 15. That's as good as it will get. And then in terms of his armor, he gets 15 points, 18 cunning, and minus 15% revenue upkeep. Pretty good, especially for the early game. But the thing is, he's not going to appear in the early game. He appears around 208. So by that time, this is just a nice bonus to have. You probably have a great economy by that time, so you don't have to worry too much about it. So it's average, and then 12% extra speed. In terms of his skills, here's where he kind of shines. So you can see that even though Whitewater, his unique skill, is in the first position, he didn't lose Wisdom of the River, which is pretty strong. It's moved to his second position. Stifling Deluge is the one he lost. And Whitewater here is very interesting. It's very similar to Stifling Deluge in that it will increase the enemy cooldown of abilities by 5 seconds. But as long as Sima Yi is not under fire, he is not routing, and he's not hidden, which means he has to kind of stay on the field. And you have no enemy in range, so he's safely standing somewhere far away. Then, infinite range Stifling Deluge. No enemies can use any abilities whatsoever. Very, very strong, in my opinion. They can still use passive abilities, but anything that requires activation with a cooldown, it just automatically goes away. You cannot use those skills. So it will shut down a lot of enemies' skills that require sort of like active boost to all the generals or enemy Wisdom River. They can't use it. And because it's infinite range, it's just super strong. So that's kind of his calling card, shutting down enemy abilities. Then moving on, we have the Benevolent Arbiter, Tao Qian. 10 points expertise, 20 points of cunning, 30 points in authority, since he does start out as faction leader. And he has a ton of great faction-wide bonuses. 2 extra administrator positions, 2 extra Simon slots, 50% extra income from family state. That's 1,000 extra income per turn from turn 1 if he is your faction leader. And that's worth like 3 trade deals in the early game. And he also gets 5% replenishment for garrison. This has to do with his unique unit, which are defaulted into his garrison. So nothing too crazy here, but still a nice bonus to have. But overall, 2 extra administrators worth so much. And 2 extra assignments not bad either. So he's almost worth about 1.5 early game rank up when you have him, and about 3 trade routes in terms of his faction-wide bonus. So quite powerful here. And then moving on to his starting trait, we have Pacifist, which is the other skill I was talking about, or the trait I was talking about that gives 5% income to all sources. So if you can get Pacifist, Ambitious, and Burn down the same character, you could technically have a 20% boost to all sources from your administrator. That would be like the holy trinity of combos, but very rare. And then the others, nothing too crazy here. Not really going to apply too much to him. And then in terms of his armor, he has a 16-6 split with Cunning and Instinct, which is quite interesting. 15 base armor, 12% speed. Nothing too fancy aside from the interesting stat split. And then he has no unique skill whatsoever. So we can move on to Daughters of the Southland, Xiao Qiao, the younger daughter of the Southland. And he had 5 points cunning, 15 instinct, 10 authority, 10% character experience, which is quite wasted on her because she is usually going to trigger in Sun Ce's faction, pretty much guaranteed. And he doesn't need any character experience boost. He has shared expertise. It's almost a foregone conclusion that all your characters are going to reach rank 10 pretty much by the late game. So this is really not needed for her to be promoted to one of those positions. And in terms of her starting trait, we have Loyal, Beautiful, Kind-Hearted. All pretty good stuff. Nothing too crazy here. Armor, 20 point base. Curiously, 18 points of expertise, which is just really weird. And then another 10% melee evasion. Do they really want to send Xiao Qiao onto the battlefield? Because that's what it feels like. And another 10% character experience boost for herself. In terms of her skills, the only one we have to really talk about here is the Qiao sisters, which is one of these skills that require a partner in crime. It requires another character with this skill for it to be activated. So the Qiao sisters obviously refer to Da Qiao and Xiao Qiao. So you have both of them in the same army or in the same battle. They don't technically have to be in the same army. They can just show up in the same battle as reinforcements perhaps. And as long as they're there, you have an infinite duration, 500 meter active range, boost to morale, and gives immune to terror for everyone. It's okay, but really nothing crazy here. And then moving on, we have the Reform Vigilante, Xu Shu, who has a lot of expertise, 25 points, 25 points of cunning, and then 10 points of authority. Gives 2 starting rank for all melee infantry recruit. Not too bad, I guess, but not too useful either. He is a brilliant officer, and he has Fraternal and Aesthetics as his other 2 traits, which gives him a lot of resolve. It's kind of a reflection that he used to be a swordsman when he was young in history, but in game he's treated as a strategist, so there's nothing too fancy there. He doesn't have double health. He has minus 10% revenue upkeep, 15% speed, 18 point cunning, 20 base armor. Not too bad, but nothing too crazy once again. And then he has no unique skill whatsoever. And then moving on, we have the Gentleman's Attendant. 10 points of resolve, 20 points of cunning, and 40 points of authority. So 70 points, which is actually quite a lot. He gets 10 military supplies in own territory. So once again, if you are a bandit faction and you're looking for some prime minister promotions, he would be quite nice because you get a lot of loot and you can just have a share the spoils in every single one of your commanderies to boost the income. And then in terms of his traits, dutiful, clever, charismatic, nothing too crazy here either. And his armor. So he is one of those that were released during the Furious Wild, so he does have double health. That's kind of the only thing that's interesting here. And his abilities, he has Turning the Tide, but not only does he have Turning the Tide, he also has the Ancient Wisdom ability, which has the same effect as Foresight from Guo Jia, except for it's an active ability that only lasts 3 minutes. So it's definitely a lot weaker than Guo Jia's ability because Guo Jia is passive, which means it doesn't even get shut down by things like White Water or Stifling Deluge. This, if you're too close to the enemy, they can shut you down in terms of Stifling Deluge will shut you down when you're close, and White Water will shut you down when you're far away even. So you can't use this if you have White Water on the field, but for Guo Jia, it's passive, it doesn't matter. But for him, it's one use only, it only lasts 3 minutes. 3 minutes is decent amount of time, right? If the enemy is just moving through a forest and you want to shoot them with your fire trebuchets, 3 minutes is enough time. But if the enemy has stock and you want to see them throughout the battle, 3 minutes is not a lot of time. So it's not that good, especially since you're losing Wisdom the River to get Ancient Wisdom. Then moving on, we have the Hemundren's Aid, and this is 5 points expertise, 15 points of cunning, 10 points of authority, 5% income to all sources. It's okay. I mean, a generic commander have this bonus, so it's not too good, but it's not too bad either. I mean, I wouldn't mind 5% income from all sources, faction-wide, but like I said, you have generic commanders with this, and generic commanders can also have other skills on their skill tree that will boost faction-wide, which makes him not appealing at all for that. But he does have the Burn trait, which is what's going for him, and perhaps why you might instead make him one of your administrators, because that's 10% income right there to that one commandery. His armor, he has 18 points of cunning, 20 base, 5% character experience for this army. So we see this again, but this time it's 5% instead of 10%. He also gives discipline to own retinue, which means if he dies on the battlefield, the retinue would not feel sad or not get demoralized, make them less likely to rout, and when they're shattered, when they're kind of broken, they can regroup instead of becoming shattered. So that's kind of the main thing with discipline. It's okay. Not bad, but not super good either. He does not have any unique skills, so we can just move on, as we have the Adept Diplomat, Zhang Hong. So Zhang Hong here has 30 points of cunning, 25 points of authority. He increased the diplomatic relations with all factions by 5 points. Not bad. I think this is okay. It's not the worst, since applied to all factions, depending on the stage in the game. It could be worth a little bit in trade deals. You never know. He also gets 3 extra cover gain per turn when spying. He was pretty much a diplomat or ambassador during his time period, so that's why he has the relationship boost and the spying boost. And in terms of his trait, enigmatic, loyal, friendly, nothing really crazy here. His armor, 15, 18, and then some speed, some range block chance, also nothing crazy going on here. And in terms of his skills, we have another one of those paired abilities. So the 2 Zhangs, and 2 Zhangs requires another one of these abilities, and that's going to be Zhang Zhao. We're going to see him next. They are not related, they're not brothers. They pretty much have the same last name, and that's about it. And they will give the entire army 20% extra base range damage. It's a lot of work for 20% base range damage. I wish the effect was a little bit stronger, because it does take quite a bit to get both of them in the same army. You're running 2 strategist army. It's not the best thing in the world. And speaking of the best thing in the world, we have Zhang Zhao, the Stern Advisor. Almost the same exact look. The faction-wide bonus is a little different. Increased satisfaction by 15 points, which is actually huge. I haven't seen anyone that can do this, so this is definitely a strong point for him, especially in the early game. And he has Wise, which is another really good satisfaction boosting skill here, because I think there is a kind-hearted one that gives like 1 point. Wise gives 5, so he just has to stand there and you get 5 points of extra satisfaction. Disciplinarian gives more satisfaction faction-wide. Intimidating gives him immune to scaring. Armor, the only thing different here is he had 30% ammo instead of 15% range block chance. This obviously means if he is holding a bow, that's very good. And he also has Zhang, which is the pair that you need to get this active ability activated. Then moving on, we have the Melodic Strategist, Zhou Yu. So 30 points of expertise, 20 points of cunning, 10 points authority, minus 10% retinue upkeep. It's actually quite good. In the late game, when you have the Prime Minister slot open with maybe 10 armies, you're saving thousands just with this. So this is definitely very strong. Plus 4 morale when defending, a kind of reflection of him defending the battle should be. And then in terms of his starting trait, he has clever, loyal, resourcefulness. Unfortunately, no brilliant for Zhou Yu, which makes him quite weak, actually. And in terms of armor, you get double health. He was the original double health general. He was the only one on launch. He has Unbreakable as part of his armor. So they're really asking you to go into the thick of things, because as a strategist, he also has 45 base armor. So he's very unique in this sense, in that he's the only one with a lot of armor value. He's the only one with a double health, at least on the launch of the game, and Unbreakable on his armor as well. So pretty interesting. And then in terms of his skills, he gets Ripples of Perspective, which is a passive buff. So it's not activated. So you have this all the time, similar to Guo Jia, except this one only gives forest spotting. It doesn't give visibility. So the difference here would be you cannot spot stock. You can see enemy movement in forests and trees, but you can't see stock units. You don't have vision everywhere. So it's definitely weaker, but for the purpose of using flaming weapons into trees, this works just as fine. Then moving on, we have the Sleeping Dragon, Zhuge Liang, the last general here in our list. So he has 15 points expertise, 40 cunning, 25 authority, 40 points, or 80 points, I'm sorry. 40 points in cunning, same as Sima Yi, the two highest strategists in the game in terms of stats. 10% campaign movement range, very, very powerful, and 15 military supplies in enemy territory, the opposite of Sima Yi, which is own territory. And the reason is because for the Northern Expedition, one was attacking, one was defending. So kind of plays into each other here. Then in terms of trait, brilliant, humble, cunning, all very good. And his items. So he's the only one with items. You have the 15 armor, 18 cunning, block chance, some charge bonus. But you also have a fan, which is an accessory item. 10 points of cunning, 10 points of satisfaction, 25% range damage for crossbow, own army. This is actually something you have to think about, because crossbows mainly focus on armor piercing damage. This is only base damage. So how is this useful? Well, as the inventor of the repeating crossbow, the repeating crossbowmen have 0 armor piercing damage and a ton of base damage. So this is really designed for repeating crossbowmen. So if you have Zhuge Liang with the fan, higher repeating crossbowmen, they're not that bad. They're only weak against enemy range that outrange them. They actually tear enemy generals apart. They tear enemy cavalries apart. They tear enemy infantry apart, assuming they're not heavily armored. Okay, that's their weakness. But if the enemy don't have a lot of armor, they hurt a ton. And they're pretty good. You should try to use them in your armies when you get a chance. And in terms of his skills, he has the Sight of the Dragon, which is a 1-use, 3-minute active ability that gives visibility range and forest spotting. We've seen this already with Ancient Wisdom, a different name for Xun Yu, I believe. And the other one he has unique here is Way of the Wind. It's an active buff. It's activated for 60 seconds, infinite range. He can be anywhere on the field. It has a long cooldown, but it's very strong. 50% extra range damage for armor piercing and base. So pretty much the second the enemy enters into your army's range, that makes sense, your ranged unit's range of fire, activate this and you're outputting 50% extra damage for the next 60 seconds, which is pretty much close to how long the enemy will reach your front line. So it's pretty effective. And you can also get a second round of this if you want, or infinite round of this. There's no limit to this. So that's going to be it for all 22 of our strategists. We're going to be jumping back to the tier list and ranking all of them right now. Alrighty, so we got to see everyone, and let's rank them now from D to S. We'll start from the bottom. Let's start with a couple of the useless ones. Now, the ones that I really don't like are characters like, say, Zhang Hong and Zhang Zhao and Xiao Qiao. They have to be paired up with a certain other character to have their unique ability shine. Aside from their unique ability, there's really not much going for them. The only character here you can kind of make an argument for a step up is maybe Zhang Zhao, because he does have that satisfaction boost. So if you want to do something like this where he's the best of the D tier, sure, because I'm just going to keep them together. Oh, another person, Lady Zhen. So these are basically satisfaction characters. The extra 10 points of morale just to put her with her sister, not really worth it. So for a lot of strategists, we're looking for high cunning, we're looking for burn traits, we're looking for good range armies, or some unique ability that can carry them. These here just really don't have anything going for them. So I think they probably belong in the D tier here. Then moving up slightly, we have slightly more useful generals. I think Chen Gong is one of them. Analyze weakness is interesting, but it's not really going to carry you far, because most of the time, you probably still prefer just having Wisdom River, which any generic have, and he has it too. And because he has it too, why would you need Analyze Weakness? Because let's say you're serving Liu Bu, which is most of the time you are, he's gonna kill someone in the activation time, 30 seconds of Wisdom the River. You're just not gonna need the extra 20% when the cooldown's happening. And he has to put himself in danger. Maybe the duel is happening in the midst of the battle. You have to stand there and try to give him that boost. So it's not that useful. Another character would have to be Diaochan. Now, aside from her unique skill, she's pretty linear. She literally only has one stat being boosted, 35 points of cunning, and she has this spy discount. That's not really that useful. She has a lot of beautiful traits, self-satisfaction boost, but not really useful for the faction as a whole. And her unique ability, the one that actually replaces Wisdom River, adds an immobility. And that's about it. And you get one use out of that. So both of them have a very weird version of Wisdom the River going on. And that gives them a little bit of flexibility in terms of usage, but not a lot. Like, I think these 6 are pretty close. Like, maybe I can see Zhang Zhao being moved up here, but that's not a big deal. I'd rather keep the two Zhangs together, mainly for the reason that their bonus put together, not that good. 20% extra range, not something that I would go for. Now, into the B tier, here's where we have most of our characters. So these are kind of all over the place, but let's just start with, let's say, Li Ru. So what makes him pretty decent is that he is probably the best duelist of all these groups. You can't duel, but you can have him in a sustained fight. He has the hold firm skill, which is very interesting. He also has Perceptive, which goes well with him. He also has double health. So I think double health is worth something here. You can stand up to a lot more damage in battle. And also you can have a lot more damage taken onto yourself before you have to rout from, lack of morale. Then speaking of double health, I think Xun Yu is also in the same boat. Double health, he has Turning the Tide, which is not bad. But overall, just someone with double health here and some other unique ability, making them better than the ones below them. And by that logic, Zhou Yu should also be here, since he also has double health and Unbreakable on top of that, and a 45-point armor. So of these 3, they can all be combat generals of sorts. There is one more character with double health, which is Shi Xie, but he has other things going for him, so he's actually going to be ranked even higher. And these 3 are here in B, and we're going to have others joining them for different reasons. So people like Xu Shu, he has the burn trait, which in my book, it's already kind of close to A tier already. You just want burn generals. Even if you have a generic burn general, it's probably worth more than all of these combined. So burn trait here gets you into B tier. And not only him, we also have people like Xun Yu, who has really nothing special going for him, no unique skills, and nothing really fancy on his armor or anything like that, but he has a burn trait, which is good enough. Even though his background bonus is the same as the generic commanders, just having the burn trait will minimum have you a B tier, if not A tier, really, in my book. And then a couple faction leader with not any flair. So like Lu Zhi, almost no stats on the armor,
And in terms of skills, he has Turning the Tide, which is useful, but not really. And his faction-wide bonus, 2 starting rank bonus, some extra character experience, they're okay, but they're not really game-changing. Liu Yan has the 15% to Peasantry, which is okay. His unique skill, Rally the Troop. They're kind of in the same shoes. They're both faction leaders, so they get kind of extra boost in terms of their background, but their unique skill is kind of Luckluster, and aside from that, nothing really going for them. So I think they can all be here. And then I think we can move on to the A tier. I think no one else should be here. Yeah, I think we can move on to the A tier. And we're going to kick off the A tier with Pang Tong. So from the ashes is super, super strong, as we have demonstrated. But as a character, he doesn't have the Brilliant trait. And you might think From the Ashes is super strong. I agree with that completely. But it's good for one fight, right? Let's say you have a tough fight, you're using it. Then you're missing health yourself. So for the next fight, you can't do that, right? If you have back-to-back fights, he become useless. The skill does have a cost, which is your health. So pairing him with some bandit generals with mending, or maybe with Tao Qian with heal, it will help, but it's still constraining, right? You need to have that set up to make him more useful. Or else, once you used your health to get the heal, things become a lot more difficult for you. So there are some limitations here. Even though standalone in a single battle, that skill is really broken. Then speaking of broken skills, Fa Zhong. Mock. Infinite damage, right? There's a cooldown to it, but it's infinite damage essentially, because there's no limited use and you can't miss. So it's not like throwing a dagger or shooting Heartseeker where you can miss on the enemy. You literally just point and click and 6k damage. So that's pretty strong too. Also no Brilliant trait, and also kind of hard to get. Both of them are not that easy to get in the game, but we're not really considering that, so we'll cut that part out. And then also kind of in the A tier, I think Rong can get in here. He has a lot of really good faction-wide bonuses, 5k population per county, 15% discount to crossbow recruitment, and 50% trade influence. Those things will carry him, even though he has really no good background, no good starting trait, and he has really no unique skill going for him. But just the fact that his faction leader with those bonuses, I think will give him at least an A tier rank here. Then everyone else here are going to be S tier, and let's talk about why. So Shi Xie, we mentioned, a double health general with a starting item set that completes 2 item set bonuses that gives extra firing rate for range units, gives extra melee evasion for own armies. He has the Brilliant trait, and he has a bunch of good faction leader boost as well. So a lot of positives going for him. And then for Guo Jia, there's only really, well, actually he has the Brilliant trait, he has Perceptive. The real thing that's going for him to make him S tier though, instead of, just B tier, is that he gets 10% corruption reduction, which is absolutely massive, because in the late game, that could be worth tens of thousands of income per turn. So that's definitely very, very strong. And then for Jia Xu, right, I'm sure most of you don't think he should be here, but here my case. Snipe on own retinue is actually really good. Actually, I'm going to sink him down a bit. It's good, but it's not that good. Like, I'm thinking of like the absolute best case where you get forest or you get ambush battles. In that case, it's just free damage. The enemy will not be able to find you and just do free damage to them, which is really, really good. But aside from those cases, let's say if you're fighting a fight in the northwest where there is no trees and your units do not have stock, then it becomes completely useless. Yeah, it's a combination of that and the fact that he has a damaging ability, which only Fa Zhong has. So I think, yeah, maybe A is better for him. I think Jia Xu should be A. But the snipe one's really, really neat. And then Sima Yi and Zhuge Liang, no doubt, should be here. Both of them kind of complement each other. Both Burn officers. Zhuge Liang has a nice range boost skill. He has a white water skill. One gives military supplies in own territory, one gives in enemy territory, but replenishment bonus for him, movement bonus for him. Ideally, you want both. They're really, really good. And then you have Tao Qian, which also deserves to be an S, because 2 extra administrators, 2 extra assignments, 50% extra family estate, that alone is deserving to be an S. But of course, he does have some faults, like he has no unique skills, but you can forgive him. When your background bonus is that good, I think he just gets into S tier and we can forget about it. So I think this is our tier list for the strategists in the game. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and we'll come back next week and we'll cover all the sentinels. So see you guys then. Bye.